All right, Neve. It is mid to late September, and today during substitute teaching, I finished reading The Greek Way by Edith Hamilton. I keep wanting to say it's by Edith Wilson. Edith Wilson was Woodrow Wilson's wife. That was also, in a lot of ways, became the very first female president, which is a whole other story. Edith Wilson was writing. This was published originally in 1930. This is actually the second publication in 1942, which has some additional chapters and some additional essays in it. Edith Wilson, from my memory, was a very, I wouldn't say very, but relatively important in terms of a lot of the feelings and thoughts about Greek and like Roman lifestyles in kind of the early 20th century. If you look up Edith Hamilton's Wikipedia, it does say that she had a life partner that in Doris Reading, I think her last name is. Right? Did I get that right? Hold on. This book is dedicated to her. I know that much. Doris Fielding Reed. I combine. Doris Reed, whom she lived with for like 40 years, and they also raised Doris's nephew together, and they're still qualified as life partners. So I guess go life partners. But yeah. The book itself, The Greek Way, is essentially, it attempts to boil down a lot of Greek art, plays, lifestyle, thoughts, religion, to a way that makes sense contemporarily, at least contemporary to 1930s and 1940s America, which is a very interesting thing to do. However, it actually became so popular. This being made like the 1950s, made like a book of the month type club or something that was really popular, and then was actually like either like the first book or was like the book that Jackie Kennedy was reading, or was like recommended to her or something of that sort. I don't remember the exact story. Right after her husband's assassination, this was like the first book she finished after that, which is just kind of like a weird thing to know, but that's kind of that. Back to the book itself. A lot of this book, I do have to say, was reading it and then realizing I had turned 2 to 3 pages and then not remembering anything that I had read. Part of that comes down to the fact that it is initially written in 1930, 1940. I've talked about this previously, I think, at least, but I know I've also talked about this in terms of education stuff, of where the GI Bill after World War II very much changed the way that people wrote, especially within like nonfiction matters and like essays and things. And so I think this is a book that really shows it, because even though I've read things that are older, I think this is the oldest nonfiction piece that I have read, and oldest research thing that I have read, and therefore it reads very differently. There's a lot of stylistic things that are not reader friendly, right? They are writer friendly, but they're not reader friendly, right? And so if you're not constantly paying attention to how these things are formatted, and even the slightest change in formatting, then you kind of lose it sometimes, right? I do have to say that's probably one of the most difficult things about reading this specific book. I am sure that there are later publications of this book in which it is more revised to be in the more standardized MLA format that we think of today. But this version specifically has some weird differences of where sometimes the formatting or the way that it is put onto the page is different almost every single time, with long quotations. It switches back and forth between how it wants to present sections of dialogue from plays. It does like 2 or 3 different ways and then constantly switches between them. So yeah, there's stuff like that, which is like, obviously you should be paying attention as you're reading, but in terms of signaling to the reader, and even like things that we kind of take for granted in terms of reading and in terms of like research papers, like transitional pieces and things of that sort, just aren't there, right? And part of that is because it's written for an audience that is presumably already very educated on these things, right? Rather than the what to read that is significant in the GI Bill and afterwards, and the way that education kind of changes. But yeah. There is certainly a lot of anti-East, anti-India, anti-China bias here, which is to be expected. I was not surprised. This was a secondhand copy, so there is some markings in here, and there's a lot of like, that's bullshit, or like weird underlines of things that are being claimed. And like reading it from someone's perspective now, which is now, 90 years later after the original publication of this, this sort of bias is to be expected, and it's not, out of the ordinary, I think. Do I like it? No, but it's something I kind of expected as I got into this. Yeah. It's also very interesting because I think in research pieces, right? In research pieces within English and within history, right? It is, in English, you can kind of make some assertions and things. But it is so much citation and so much looking back at things and going back. In history and in science, at this point, to make an assertion that is not, or make a claim, or make anything that is not backed, it would be astounding to do. And this book is just that, right? It's just nothing but claims about the way that these people were, the way that people's lived, interpretations of literature where there's just no citation anywhere for any of this stuff for research papers. There is references at the back of the book, which is like, okay, I guess, but within this, right, it doesn't give you a lot of information, and most of it is based on the quotations that she uses, which is so much of it is, here's a section of the Iliad, here's a section of Hamlet, here's a section of this play, right? Rather than, these other sources, these other things that she's using to back up her claims about the way that these people were living. So that's a little strange. Once again, I think it is more of a, when this is written, not a Edith Hamilton is the worst researcher in the world type deal. But yeah, the claims that she actually makes, really, in argument, there's kind of, I'm gonna say 2 to 3 really big claims that she kind of lays out and spends a lot of time kind of dissecting. The first claim is really that mankind's in Greek, and what makes ancient Greece unique is this balance between mind and spirit, which really kind of comes down to this inherent balance between religion and science, right? They are on equal playing fields. One directly influences the other without overtaking anything, right? It is very often viewed, and I have fallen into this pit many times in my life, right, is that religion and science are counter to one another. Not necessarily opposites, but it is very hard to follow one while accepting the other, right? And the Greeks, whether because they were more primitive within their abilities of science, whether it was because their religion was relatively weak, right? Any of these, either of these things could be the culprit of this, but in terms of reason and in terms of religion, they were relatively equal on equal playing fields, which then makes them categorically unique in terms of a civilization. The other thing is how learned their upper class was. There's a number of different assertions that Edith Hamilton makes that are kind of like, because this is what is written, or what she is reading, therefore that is the ultimate truth, right? But then when it comes to looking at whether it be Elizabethan England or the Romans or India, she takes this kind of thing of, well, there's these other things that is kind of written or is indirectly mentioned in a play, and therefore that is also the entire way of life for these people, right? And so, but then completely ignores the same thing for the Greeks, right? And part of it is because, well, it makes a much better argument for why the Greeks are a very unique culture and people, and why we should be imitating them more than we do the Romans, right? But it's also very much a, what are we doing here, Hamilton? She does this in regards to the learnedness of the civilization, right? She constantly is implying and discussing how smart, intelligent, educated all of Greece was, which was certainly not the case, right? But that's kind of what is constantly being put forward, right? That she tells the story of that on the dawn before a battle was supposed to begin, a naval battle was supposed to begin, two of the ship's captains ended up gathering for dinner and then discussing poetry over poetry and literature with each other the night before this monumentous battle was supposed to occur, right? And it is a very Greek story, but it's one that she kind of takes and then kind of expands upon in a couple different ways. But really, what Edith Hamilton is trying to get across is that what makes Greek culture, ancient Greek culture, so unique is this interest in taking things, right, slower than usual to make the man more complete, right? There's not necessarily an interest in being, the best warrior or the best, artist or critic or whatever, right? They have an interest in being the best person, and then taking in whatever needs to be taken in to become the best person, right? Which is certainly a more unique take on personhood, but it's one that I personally enjoy, right? As someone who likes to do a lot of different things, but you know, it's not efficient. It's not the way that we would, you know, in a capitalist world, not a way to live necessarily. Yeah. And then I think the final one, and the final big thing that Edith Hamilton kind of tries to push forward, is this argument that the Greek way of life, right? Yes, it is about becoming the best man, but is becoming the best man, it's hard to kind of phrase, while also recognizing that there is beauty in humanity, right? And what I mean by that is, when you look at cultures, whether it be us, the United States, whether you think that we are too focused on reason or too focused on religion, right? It is that there's beauty in the higher power. There's beauty in magnitude. There is beauty in putting faith in something, whether that be religion, whether that be some sort of science, right? Whereas it is the Greek philosophy that you put your faith in mankind, and therefore mankind is beautiful. It's a sentiment that's, I think, gotten more popular nowadays, in which like there's beauty in the mundane and things, which to an extent, yes, because there's beauty amongst mundane is an extension and a rephrasing of God is in the small moments, which is a phrase that has been used quite a bit, right? But it's that sort of sentiment, right? Of where to be human is to be a God unto yourself, but also to have faults, right? And it is nothing that humankind does should surprise you, because you are also humankind, right? Versus the more modern take, which is heavily individualistic, right? Whether or not, you know, we see it that way, right? It is about how the individual reacts within society, within the world, within, you know, how does the individual have a connection with God? How does an individual affect science? How does an individual win an award, right? So, yeah, I think that's all I got. That's all I got for Edith Hamilton in the Greek way. Interesting book. Tiring book, but interesting.